Okay. Good morning, everybody. Kyle here from Capacity Building International, and we are now in the last of our series on stability policing to community resilience. And we are joined today by Lieutenant Colonel Massimo Pani from the Italian Carabinieri. And good morning. And what we are going to do first is just do a really quick summary of what we've discussed over the last few weeks. For those who have not attended the webinar series, and then also just to kind of recap and summarize everything that we've gone through, because it's been a lot of information so far. So due to some technical issues, we're presenting the slides in this way, but we'll just cover these very quickly. So the entire series was organized around the idea of we need to introduce stability policing in the various different actors, and also discuss how the future of warfare is shaping the way that we conduct crisis response operations. And because of that, we first opened our discussion with the changing nature of warfare, and that was with Dr. Carlucci from Coventry University, who had a key kind of 3 key points to come out of that, which was, first of all, we're getting into 4th generational warfare, which means that essentially everything is changing. The dynamics, the lines between civilian and military capabilities are shifting. It's a very gray area now. Stability operations are only increasing. And also we're looking at multi-dimensional peacekeeping as we go into different evolutions of conflict and different in dynamic environments that we're entering into. And so this is something that is likely to only increase over time and is not going to be going away anytime soon. So then NATO and other international organizations need to adapt accordingly. Now, then we were actually had the opportunity to attend the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence conference on the spoilers in stability policing, and actually see presentations from those in Afghanistan, Somalia, EU, and also United Nations, and where we actually got to see some of the challenges that they were facing in terms of their own missions. And from those, there were some key points that I drew out of that, which were just important for us to have and shape our discussion, was that these are really long-term engagements. These are 20 years or more is what we're talking about. So when you think about the Balkans and the origin of stability policing, so that was 91, 92 with Bosnia, 99 for Kosovo. Afghanistan's been 18 years, going on 19 years. And so these are all very long engagements, and which means also that stability requires institutional and systems change. And this is one of the reasons why, because of the fact that you just cannot create secure and safe environments by just personnel alone. There's got to be the rule of law. There's got to be entire systems that change in order to support sustainable institutions. So there's always, of course, the questions of military or civilian advisors, who's best. And I think that that's where it's really about the expertise and who's providing it and who has the capability to provide it. And that's one of the questions that is always going to be in this transitional space as we go from military to civilian capabilities. And in all aspects, corruption and culture are a key issue or a driving issue that shapes the reality on the ground that we're functioning in. And corruption undermines a lot of the work that we're trying to do, and culture shapes the way that we're able to do it. So Afghanistan is a very different culture than Kosovo, which has a very different culture than Ukraine, and which has a very different culture than anywhere else that we're operating. And so culture shapes the way that we're able to do things, and corruption continues to undermine that. Then we actually talked to Eric Beinhardt from the U.S. Department of Justice and the ICTAP program, and he discussed more about how the civilian component, or in this case from the U.S. Department of Justice, can be introduced into the policing environment, and in which case it was really about, once they get told by the embassy or by that country team that they want to have some additional assistance, then they go through the U.S. Department of Justice and through the ICTAP program as one of their key tools, and they put together a systems-based response and framework. Now, this is all a sort of a very complicated slide. What I want you to take away from this is the fact that there are threats to the security environment that are systemic, and the institutions need to be able to respond to that. So this threat could be infectious disease, food and water, natural disaster, or military or terrorist acts, or financial system failure, all of which undermines stability in these societies And the government sectors have to be there to be able to address those. And the government sectors can only function if they have the appropriate legislative authority and system in place to be able to do so. And so in terms of police, what is coming out of that is, and the example provided by Eric Bainhart, is the Public Order and Management Plan, which means, how can they deal with these type of situations in these environments, and especially when some institutions are more adapted or more capable than others. So are the public utilities in place? Are we able to deliver effectively humanitarian assistance? What is the role of the military? What is the role of the security forces in this entire system that's supposed to be responding and actually supporting the citizen population with their safety, their secure environment? And so this is where it comes into what is the impact of these types of programs. And that's, of course, the human rights issue that we always try to incorporate into the development programs that we have, the tools for civic education. What is the essential police policies that we have to develop? What is the framework for training? Because there's always, in the aspect of increasing capabilities or capacities in other nations, it's always an issue of operations, training, education, personnel, human resources, all these different fundamental aspects, which are the cornerstones and the foundations of building sustainable institutions. And then what is the role of police in society as far as a critical element in election security? Because elections are huge as far as developing societies. Look at what's happening across the world with elections these days. And all of which equates to essentially improved governance, which is what we want to see. And policing is one route to get into a public sector, which can have a direct impact on security of the population, to be able to give you the space in the room to be able to build out the rest of these systems. And so this was something that Eric had provided us an overview with, and their project kind of plan of how they approach these types of missions. But today we're going to talk about the role of stability of NATO and stability policing. And this is where today we're going to kind of get more in details about how NATO addresses this key issue, and what resources are available in NATO, and then what is the perspective of NATO towards this unique topic itself. So with that, welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Pani. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kyle.
And of course, if you could just give us a quick introduction of who you are and where you are, because I know that you recently changed your mission and your position. So we'd like to hear more about that, what you're working on today.
Okay, thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you very much to Capacity Building International for hosting me today. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Massimo Pani of the Carabinieri Corps, as you have mentioned, and currently I'm working for the EU in North Macedonia for counterterrorism and counter-violent extremism 2-year project. Until last September, so the past month, I have worked for more than 6 years in the Italian Rapid Deployable Corps of NATO. As I'm sure all your guests know, that NATO has 9 rapid deployable corps all over the world, ready to be deployed according to the needs of the alliance. And during my remit, I have worked on a series of projects, and one of these was developing the NATO Stability Policing Concept Development and Experimentation Program. And today I would like to talk about it, and to talk about how NATO with stability policing can counter the current and the future emerging security threats. So this is my agenda for today.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I've got your slides up now. So
next one, please. So this is my agenda for today. I would like to talk briefly about the 2016 Warsaw Summit. What are the discontinuities and the uncertainties that NATO and the world is facing today? What is stability policing and what we should intend as a security gap? what are the tasks and the activities of stability policing, its origins, and how the stability policing concept development and experimentation program was developed. Next, please. So we, with the declaration and the Warsaw Summit of July 2016, NATO stressed the need to provide security inside and outside the alliance by projecting stability. Next, please. And in order to do that, NATO realized that we are facing a series of discontinuities and uncertainties. The world, as Heraclito said more than 2 millennia ago, was described as everything changes and nothing stands still. Unfortunately, a lot has changed since that way of saying, and nowadays everything is changing at an accelerating pace and on a variety of scale. But these changes are not only incremental and isolated, but are happening one next to the other simultaneously and are connected and interconnected. So what are these discontinuities? Are factors that can cause a disruption and a change of the path that certain trends are having, and they even can cause these trends to disappear. So we can say that currently we are living in a post-normal times with a future that is intrinsically complex, chaotic, contradictory, and uncertain. And you can see from these slides 3 typical categories of discontinuities that NATO and the world have to face. There are the black swan on the left one. I'm sure you have already spotted it. Black swans are high impact, hard to predict, and rare events. Then there are the black jellyfish, which are events we all think we know about them, we understand them, but they can turn out to be very complex and uncertain, and sometimes with a very nasty sting of their tail. Then there are the black elephants, which are challenges that are currently visible to everyone, but no one wants to deal with them. And they can turn out to be very risky, large-scale issues with several and latent costs. Next. Alongside these discontinuities, there are the uncertainties, which are areas that can have strategic implications in the future. And I'm just naming a few, just to give you an idea, but I'm sure you already understood what they might are. For example, the increasing disruption and the cost of the climate change. And I'm not just talking about our well-being and our future lives, but I'm talking specifically from the security point of view. So the security planning assumptions, access, basing, the logistic that has to be reinvented and totally reviewed. Then also the increasing demand and competition for resources between states and non-state actors. And this may lead to disorders, violence, and economic disadvantages. Demographic change. UN has bombarded us with surveys and data concerning how the future world will be. We all know that are expected by 2030s a lot of mega cities. With mega cities are cities and conglomerates with more than 10 million inhabitants. And this is going to create a lot of complexities, especially for the security forces and the police, which will adopt special equipment to deal with these new issues and new operational SOPs. Alongside this, there are rising inequalities and a reduced social cohesion. It's in the limelight nowadays, the Chile situation and many other problems that our communities are facing all over the world. Then the permanent and the increased threats of the crime and terrorism, with this ungoverned space that provides to these people freedom of movement, and that must be tackled and must be curbed. And alongside this, the erosion of the state sovereignty. We have been facing with an increased competition for power, but also an increased provision of services by NGOs and non-state actors. So alongside, I could go on and on, but it's just to give you a glimpse, an idea of what during the NATO stability policing concept development and the experimentation we had to face and to take into account. So not only discontinuities and uncertainties, but please, Kyle, next slide. But also here there is in a very quick snapshot what the UK Ministry of Defence thinks that is going to be the future of the world. So we have been witnessing a transition to a world that is more multipolar, multidimensional, with a multitude of state but also non-state actors. And it is especially from this that are stemming multifaceted threats, especially from those who are more fragile and collapsing states. So we can see a distribution of power with a change from a more centralized to a diffused power, and with less and less cooperation between states. Next one, please. So in this very brief overview, it is what the 2016 Warsaw Summit started their works. So over the past 2 decades, we have witnessed transnational organized crime groups, terrorists, human trafficking, local warring factions, rampant corruption, political motivated violence, that have spread armed conflicts with more increased complexities, and that was fostered by an economical crisis, growing unemployment, and also fueled by religious fanaticism. But most of these armed conflicts were fought not by regular armies, were fought by militias or terrorists that were using hybrid techniques, and this and such criminal activities were often fought with insurrectionary wars, with not clear front lines and not clearly identified enemies. And this has spread the conflict, threatening closer countries, far away ones, but also like is happening in Europe in the very last years. And another important factor that was that the Warsaw Summit had to face is that such conflicts are have generated an entire collapse of the local institutions, especially the police and the judiciary ones. And this is resulting in a breakdown of governance, the failure of the rule of law, and a state of lawlessness and chaos that is affecting the population. So in this regard, there were legal, political, and especially operational aspects in reestablishing a safe and security environment. And in this framework, we can say that a robust police capacity can play a really great role, especially in these fragile environments. Next one, please. So how can, so NATO wanted with the 2016 Warsaw Summit and has endowed itself with proactive police capacity. And stability policing can not only prevent the crisis escalation into a conflict, but also prevent the reignition of the combat activities, but also suppressing the source of instabilities. And these activities of stability policing can be conducted as a preventive intervention just to stabilize the environment of an existing justice sector, in order to prevent the collapse of the government and reestablish a safe and security environment, but also it can operate in post-natural disasters. And similarly, stability policing activity may include a series of working tasks by supporting the host nation judicial authorities and the correctional system, so working alongside them, ensuring, for example, the preservation and the collection of proof in order to meet the highest judicial standards. Next one, please. So I'm sure you are all wondering about what is stability policing now. So stability policing forces are organization or personnel that are specifically trained and experienced in policing within NATO standards that are going to be developed and are capable to responding to crisis situations. And by a working definition developed by the stability policing community that was developed around this concept throughout the years, to this, all the NATO states can contribute by providing or gendarmerie type forces or military police or civilian police forces, but also contractors. So in this way, NATO gave the opportunity to all NATO members and states who are collaborating with NATO to provide forces within their capabilities. Next, please. Stability policing can operate mainly through the reinforcement or replacing of forces. Reinforcement mission can happen when the indigenous police forces are present, are reliable, but can have demonstrated limited effectiveness. So this stability policing in this regards provides training, mentoring, monitoring, advising, and a general sustainment and support to the indigenous police forces. The executive police powers in this case are not remain within the indigenous police forces, and NATO stability policing just provide series of activities so that the goal is to enhance the local police self-sufficiency and effectiveness. While with the replacement, the local police forces are not can be not present or are not recognized by the government, or may even not be willing to provide their services to the community. So in this situation, all police tasks must be assumed by NATO stability policing that operates as a law enforcement, so upholding the law with area patrolling and controlling areas, forensic, border and sensitive structure control, criminal investigation, intelligence, and civil disturbances operation. In this particular task, NATO stability policing assets are entitled with executive police powers. So these are encompassing the use of force as well as the power to search and arrest. And in this regard, appropriate mechanism of coordination have to be established with the local juridical and correctional system in order that all the institutions of the states can operate effectively. Next, please. So stability policing has a focus on the local population and the local civilian police forces, and is conducted with civilian police mindset towards them. Can be performed by military and non-military actors, which have to consider the civilian aspects of their tasks. And stability policing can be performed, next please, can be performed in, as I mentioned before, in unstable or already destabilized situations, before a state is failing, during the failure of the states, or while a state is recovered. Next, please. So as the Afghan and the Iraqi theater has unfortunately emphasized, the most difficult challenge in this type of operation is not to defeat the enemy, unfortunately, but to effectively try to stabilize the territory in order to allow the local population to achieve a gradual economical and democratic development. Next, please. So what is the security gap concept? It's when the traditional war comes to an end, and it's the exact period when the local institutions can achieve a sense of self-determination with a willingness to autonomously performing all their tasks with full control of their region, their territory, administering the justice and providing democratic management of the institutions. Next one, please. So this slide gives you a more precise idea of what the security gap can be. So on the horizontal axis, you can see that there is the local police capacity from a total need of being replaced up to a phase when NATO stability policing can help in reinforcing them. So while on the vertical axis, you can see a state from the state of lawlessness until the effective civilian police capacity. So the security gap, we can say it's that area between the dotted line and the continuous line, so that the policing capacity are brought from a more ineffective way to full capacity of their tasks. And next slide, please. And in this one, I wanted to provide all the stability policing tasks that can be provided. So from basic policing skills up to advanced policing skills, with both the reinforcement and the replacement. So with the reinforcement just in training, mentoring, monitoring, advising, and in replacing, so this can be performed in both the activities. So stability policing are specialized functions, but are not limited to just to the restoration of the public security, but they can go to any activity, including crime investigation. So from war crime inquiries to assistance to international court hearing, counter-organized crime, search and seizure of the crime scene, intelligence-led policing, or they can conduct any type of highly technical forensic and biometric activities and support through police capacity building. So mentoring, negotiation, mediation, building support, institutional capacity building, and so on and so forth. And including also special policing activities like critical site security, close protection, counterterrorism, counter-organized crime networks, election security, border control, and so on and so forth. Next, please. So the SP origins. It's not stability policing, let's say, it's not a capability only that resides only with NATO. Also, UN and EU have developed their capabilities in this sector. But as Professor Digis has stressed many times, NATO stability policing is the only robust policing organization capable to perform specialized mission in disciplined group that can overcome the three gaps that he sees in UN and EU. So these are the deployment gap, the enforcement gap, and the institutional sustainability gap. In particular, the deployment gap is that the lag time between the moment of the arrival of the military contingent up to the full operational capability of this asset. Normal, this gap is temporal in nature, but can have profound consequences. Up to really awakening the mission. Then there is the enforcement gap, where there is the need to perform all the functions that fall between the lethal force of a combat unit down to the minimal level of individual capabilities of the policeman. Then there is the institutional capability gap that refers to the incapacity of the government to establish and sustain the rule of law. So according to Professor Digis, NATO with the stability policing is the only robust policing organization capable to overcome these gaps. Next one, please. So the SP project started in July 2016 with the Warsaw Summit and was developed through a military campaign, so analyzing and integrating the .MPLFI, so doctrine, organization, training, material, personnel, logistic, facilities, and interoperability. An academic research that was developed with universities and research centers, so with master's degree students and PhD researchers, unclassified workshops, and an experimentation phase that was held with the Viking 18 in Sweden. Next one, please. Overall, we managed to gather 112 international organizations, more than 200 subject matter experts who gathered in 4 workshops. Next one, please. And I come to a conclusion. And the Viking 18 experimentation was an exclusive setting where we tested NATO stability policing. It was held in April 2018 in Enköping in Sweden. It had more than 2,500 participants that were belonging to 61 world countries, and with more than 80 national and international organizations who took part to this training. It is really a special and unique setting with it's an international exercise that involves participants from NATO, EU, UN, with military, civilian, and police assets. And everyone who was interviewed there, who provide their contribution to our experimentation phase, stressed the excellent opportunity of NATO in having stability policing in the future. So there is a strong validity of this concept, and with underlying the strength of NATO stability policing concept in all the future campaigns and theater of operations. And this concludes my briefing, and thank you very much for having me.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I've got just a few questions that I think will help us kind of tie in all these things together. And I wanted to go back to one of your slides. I've got to find it now. But you had, I guess I'll just leave it here for now. Maybe it was earlier. You had mentioned judicial standards. Okay, I'll just leave it here because I know I have a question about this slide. So you had mentioned judicial standards, and I think that's very interesting because this is such a wide and diverse topic, and it's got so many moving pieces, right? It's extremely difficult to define everything that you have to do and who is supposed to do it, right? And I think one of the interesting things about this specific topic is the fact that, and I think we had talked about it before slightly, was, it's not as if you need more police all the time. It's not just more police is the answer. It's the judicial system, which if you don't have a functioning judicial system, if I could say that, then basically the system is broken, and it doesn't matter how many police you have. So can you elaborate on that a little bit about, as far as, supporting the judicial system, and then what kind of standards there are, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Well, this opens up another big area of discussion, and many thanks for mentioning it. Well, it depends on clearly stability policing cannot operate without the cooperation, support, guidance, and direction of prosecutors and judges. And cannot be fully functional if there are not correctional facilities that are operating up to the best international standards. So this is a very critical area that must be fully developed, because there are still areas that needs to be fully examined, but clearly, as you mentioned, we cannot be effective and fully functional if people who are tried are not correctly and fairly brought to prison, and are not fairly tried with democratic and international standards. So this opens up a big discussion on local courts, mixed courts, or having just international courts that might substitute or replace the local judicial system while ineffective or inappropriate for that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really broad topic, and I understand that. And so, and we could almost have a whole separate discussion on what is the role of clan-based societies in terms of justice, right? And so both and I know, because we've been in so many operations, is the fact that the clan structure has a very large impact in not just justice, but in decision making and processes and all the systems that go into that. And basically every operational area that we've been in is a clan-based society.
Sure.
Right? So as society and these nations kind of crumbles and disintegrates, it kind of goes down to a clan-based type of organization, or it has been there for such a long time that it just has sustained itself as far as a method of achieving justice. So that could be a whole nother discussion. But when we talk about, and the interesting thing here that I wanted to bring up that is kind of along the same lines as the clan-based discussion is, of course, the picture here that's on the bottom right, which is something that I think has always been there, but it's been more in terms of like the UN and less in terms of like NATO, until we started to see, and correct me if I'm wrong, but until we started to see the rise of IS and everything else like that in Afghanistan, and Taliban in Afghanistan, which are actually actively destroying cultural monuments and heritage sites. So then we start to see, okay, what is the role of NATO in cultural and heritage protection and protection of these sites? And so then this has been a evolving issue over the last couple of years, I would say, and has gotten a lot more ground. And so this is where I think it's not only in the destruction of, but even after Iraq, where did all these antiquities go, right? And the smuggling aspect, the criminal aspect, the organized crime aspect behind all of these things that are happening. So could you kind of elaborate? I know you can't talk about the whole thing. We don't have that much time, but elaborate on the role of, for example, the Carabinieri in this type of very specific issue.
Thank you very much for mentioning this, Kyle. Well, actually, as you correctly said, it's a topic that arose during, I think, the first Desert Storm with the, let's say, international forces finding themselves unprepared to deal with the preservation of the cultural heritage. In particular, this was arised by many American professors and museums that were worried about the huge heritage of Iraq at that time, and with the a lot of worries about criminal smuggling and destroying museums and this important and worldwide heritage. And this opened up also a series of need of applying international laws and treaties regarding the cultural heritage. Cultural heritage must not be considered just something that belongs to that country and to the population, but belongs to the worldwide international population. So it's international cultural heritage for this reason. So we have an obligation, a moral, a legal, and a cultural obligation to keep these cultural properties under protection, and to devise instruments that are that can be applied during also when there are these conflicts, or when a state is collapsing. So NATO stability policing can also provide through the Carabinieri Corps that have unit specifically trained in this regard. It's we are one of the countries with the biggest worldwide heritage in culture, and through the years we trained our police officer with these special units to conduct investigations internationally, and in order to protect and collect and retrieve these items worldwide. So there is a need also in the future. As you mentioned correctly, ISIS exploited in many ways the cultural properties of the area that they occupied. And so there is a need to preserve these properties, but also as these are a part of our culture, and they will strongly mark our future.
Interesting. Yeah. It's good to hear that there's kind of a developed capability in the Carabinieri to do that. And this comes down to my next question when we talk about stability policing in terms of, let me find your slide that you had, this gap. So the gap concept. So what I find interesting here, and maybe I'll use this slide because it's a little bit better. What I find interesting here was that, in my time with NATO, what I kind of discovered was the fact that we encounter these new situations, and then it generally comes down to which country has the capability before we actually try and build anything, right? But build a new capability, because there's all sorts of implications with that. So I think in many ways, NATO was fortunate. I don't want to say lucky, but fortunate in the aspect that, Italy, Romania, France had a Carabinieri or gendarmerie capability already inherent in their national capabilities to be able to fill this role and then solidify a concept and then build capabilities with NATO after that. But I think that the interesting thing was that the Carabinieri had been around for a very long time before that. So how often has Italy played a role in certain situations like this, where we see a security gap and what you call the policing gap, as on this slide? It's not a new thing for the Carabinieri, I don't think.
No, you're right, Kyle. Thank you very much for your question. We have developed this concept that was originally the multinational specialized unit, and we have been operating in the Balkans since 1998. So we have a strong experience not only in the Balkans but also in the Middle East. We brought this concept at the service of the alliance. Indeed, as Kilcullen, that was for many years the advisor at the Pentagon, the future needs, future theater operation needs more constabulary forces in order to prevent the vacuum of power, and in order to stabilize, to provide more safe and secure environment in these fragile or collapsing states. For sure, as you mentioned, there are many European and non-European countries that have these gendarmerie type forces, carabinieri type forces, but there is the strong need to have more constabulary forces that are capable to provide their task and contribute to this concept and to the future theater of operation, because many experts are believe that their future theater of operation are more going to develop police style operations rather than pure military ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's going to be more complicated. And I think one of the last points I want to make here is a few years ago, I was in DC presenting at a conference, and I'm going to try and annotate on your slide here, and hopefully this works. But the issue that I was having is, hold on one second. I was discussing the role of security sector reform and how it creates a sometimes a different effect than what we want inside the city that we're working in, and or inside the country that we're working in. So when you have a stability policing gap here, where you see kind of this, the indigenous police capacity is reduced because of conflict and then has to be escalated and brought back up. What we have on another side, which people don't often correlate that together, is the fact that we're doing security sector reform with the security forces. So then if we look at either what's happening in Afghanistan or Iraq or what we're doing in Kosovo, we have a large amount of assistance that's applied on the security forces. And so you'll see this gap go up. It gets filled pretty quickly by the security forces. And then what typically happens at some point is we need to have this type of intersection here. And this intersection here is critically important from my perspective, coming from crisis management, because when we have a disaster anywhere in this zone, what ends up happening is there's an over-reliance on the military security forces to be the first responder, because we've applied millions of euros of assistance and all this training and education, and they become a rapidly increasing capability, which earns more of a public trust, right? And then you end up in a position where they become almost a de facto first responder to any type of incident, which then tends to invert the role of the police and the rule of law inside the society, right? And that for a certain period of time. So these things have to be done very much in parallel. And as you know from being in other countries, sometimes there's always a conflict between, especially in these operational areas, between the security forces and the police as far as who has authority sometimes, because it's still in a state of conflict and still requires military action, but then you also need to preserve rule of law and justice for people, right, and the society. So it's very interesting in this aspect, and maybe just a couple of your thoughts on this, but you know, there's always a massive amount of military assistance that comes in, and then police reform starts rather slowly, right? So, but what we do inadvertently, the effect we create is an over-reliance on security forces to be a first responder, and then we have to eventually move that back, you know. So
thank you very much for this comment. It's really spot on, and I would like to stress that through the years, especially with the multinational specialized unit in the past in the Balkans, we devised the concept of the blue box and the green box. So the green box represents are the military units that are supporting, as you were saying, the safe and security environment, but there are niche areas where this becomes blue box. So all the green box is surrounding the blue box. That is an area like with the let's say special forces, where only police forces are have the power, the capabilities, and the full instruments, knowledge of the practices, and etc., and so on and so forth, to be fully operational and endowed to provide their perform at their best their tasks. So there is this exchange between the green box, where usually military have the power and the lead, and with the blue box, where we intervene, we go in as police forces, and have the primacy in that moment or in that area, because we are considered, and we are the most capable to be fully functional and operational.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think, again, I think one of the most critical points is where we can cross those back over, right? And so where can we, where do our programs meet, and to where we can actually have that conversion to where, okay, things are stable enough to where we don't need to rely on the security forces. And then, we have a more public trust in police, and the police capacities are built to where that should be the face of normal, so to speak, right? Because even in your country, in my country, and things like that, it's not typical to see the military on the streets responding to different incidents, right? Sure. So we need to return to normalcy as far as we can. So,
true. But as you were saying, it is the function of the police is extremely necessary in all the moments of the campaign, of the campaigns, because with gaining the support of the population, being alongside the population and gaining their trust, we really support the intervention of the coalition forces and of the military forces. So that, let's say, the military should exploit our knowledge, our capabilities, our SOPs, so that to have long-standing missions with the support of the local population, so that they can dedicate themselves purely in fighting the enemy.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And on the last comment here, and let me see if I can't turn off that annotation. There we go. The last comment I have here, and I'll just talk while I do this, is on what you're considering the basic police skills to the advanced police skills. And one of the themes that we have been discussing to a certain extent is, how do we rebuild that community engagement? How do we rebuild that community resilience? And so I see here that you have, of course, in the middle, you've got the building confidence as far as a medium set police skill, and then you over an advanced police skills is community policing. So can you give us, or just elaborate for just a second or two about this issue as far as engagement in the communities, and then rebuilding the public trust to a certain extent?
It links me with the previous my previous reply. These are skills and capabilities that are innate to the police forces. It is something that we do every day in our communities and with our population. So it's something that we can being able to provide also in fragile countries or in collapsing countries. It is our activities that through community policing actually are developed, and it's mixed skills of listening to the elders, to the religious institutions, to women, kids. So it's a cross-cutting type of activities that we develop and perform in among the population and for the population. So that's that is why it restores the confidence of the population towards us and towards the international institutions that are operating in that country in that moment. Kyle, I'm sorry, I don't hear you. I don't hear you anymore.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, thank you. So I was just going to say, wrapping up, because it's been an hour already, and we like to keep these things to an hour, sometimes less. But yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation and the discussion. And one of the things that I take away from this, of course, it's a very broad discussion. Again, a lot of different topics, but one of the things I take away is the fact that a lot of these programs are interconnected. Again, you can't. Police is great, but police without a judicial system or a correctional system is not going to be useful, right? And then, in terms of cultural heritage, there's the whole set of behind that, from laws to academia and everything else that go behind that as well. And then over into community policing and building confidence, the outreach components, and working with those types of societies. And so everything is connected together, and nothing can be done in a bubble. And that's what I think. And sometimes when we talk about policing, people just think police, and that's really not the correct way to view things, right? So, and that's where, just in closing really quick, I just wanted to say, for those who are watching the webinar and attendance, we do have in the summer of 2020 International Organizations Summer Abroad program with the American College in Thessaloniki, which is I think just a couple of hours from you now, Massimo. And basically, we are going to discuss the international organizations, but we're going to do so on campus in Thessaloniki in Greece for a good portion of the summer program. But then we're actually going to do a field study over to Pristina in Kosovo for 2 weeks. And we're going to hear from the international organizations that are there, and more importantly about who they are, what they do, how they do their mission, and what their roles and responsibilities are in that region, and how do they function. And so this is where if you have a free summertime in 2020, then I highly recommend coming over and joining us, because the fact that we will be hearing firsthand from those in the field about what they do and how they perform their job. So with that, yeah, and of course, Massimo, we'll invite you to come down as well, because you're not too far from there, and so it'd be great to have you come over. And of course, again, thank you for everybody who's attended this webinar series, and we have a lot more that are planned. So we will just be sending out the notifications in the future for those. And again, once again, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Pani, for joining us today and taking out your time from your busy schedule and your transition to join us.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you very much, Kyle.
All right, thanks a lot, and everybody have a good day. Thanks.
Sure.